Minnesota is ground zero right now for civil unrest. And this civil unrest is eventually going to lead to things that neither you or I want to have happen. So in this video, let's discuss where all this leads and how it probably won't end well. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about how the unrest in Minnesota is ground zero to an eventual police state. And we can see that evolving right now in front of our very eyes. Now we have to understand that there's a lot of different things in play here that are happening to kind of culminate the situation into what it is. But we need to discuss what's causing the unrest first, and then we can discuss why it will lead to an eventual police state, which is not what anyone wants, neither the protesters or the people involved with looting or the people on the other side of the argument who all can definitely agree that nobody wants to live under a police state. But unfortunately, the justification is being put into place right now for that to be a permanent placement, especially in places like Minnesota, okay? And if you're preparing for unrest to get worse, especially in your urban environment, and you're worried about how that could eventually lead to losing more and more of your rights here in the future, then hit the subscribe button below, because these are things that are happening right now, and we gotta talk about them so that we can prepare for them to actually happen in the future at some point, okay? So, the shooting of Daunte Wright, which happened in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, is an issue that caused additional unrest that has occurred in the same area for over a year now, which is in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota, okay? And now this situation occurred about 10 miles away from where the Derek Chauvin trial is happening that was related to the death of George Floyd. Okay, so now this whole situation has exploded into more unrest, more protests, more looting, rioting, and everything else. And of course, more use of force from the police as well. So this is happening now. You have to understand a few things. One is that anytime you want to survive a situation, especially regarding people who are armed, so in this case, maybe the police would be the person who's armed, maybe when you're not, okay? Avoidance is key, and that's something that's trained in lots of pistol courses and self-defense classes, is that the first thing you should do to stay alive is to avoid entering a situation that could be tumultuous, okay? So, think about it in this way, okay? Avoidance is key in any fatal situation. It would have avoided the situation from ever occurring. So in this situation, the gentleman, Daunte Wright, who was killed, and what I'll just say shouldn't have been, but he was killed, and it happened because he had expired tags, okay? So you have expired tags, so you know you're opening yourself up to the idea of getting pulled over, okay? So then you take it from there and you have warrants out for your arrest. So now you know that the expectation of being arrested is also there. So first off, you didn't avoid getting interaction because of your expired tags. And second off, you knew that if you did have interaction, there would be consequences to it. Moving from there, one of those warrants was related to illegal possession of a firearm. So that is now going to escalate tension in that situation, saying that the last time this guy got arrested, it's because he illegally had a firearm on him that he wasn't supposed to have. So of course that's going to make police more on edge. Then you resist that arrest because it's not something you agree with and should not be happening to you. And of course, this happens on a regular basis. So that arrest is being resisted, which then forces subdual by the police. Well, in this situation, the subdual led to this person's death, and it should not have, but it did. And this is what happens in any kind of a fatal scenarios. There's a lot of things that led up to the eventual situation that occurred. And especially as people who are worried about preparedness, trying to avoid putting yourselves in those positions is key to not being in those positions. So I wanted to discuss that first. Now, I didn't want to come on here and try to say whether or not this whole situation is justified or anything like that, because from what I can tell, it was very negligent, if all of the reports so far out there are accurate, that this person should not have died and should not have been shot point blank in the chest sitting in the front seat of their car. That's just what I'm going to say. But, of course, we got to see how everything turns out, right? Well, move on from there, okay? Understand that lack of training or gross negligence most likely led to this situation, which is still somebody's fault. It does not mean that everything is written off because, well, she said taser and it was a gun, so therefore not really anybody's fault. That's not true either. And there's a lot of responsibility that goes into being in law enforcement. There's a lot of responsibility that goes into being in charge of law enforcement officers and ensuring they're getting proper training and proper practice with their firearms or with their other weapons such as tasers. Now, in this situation, possibly you could blame things like that on defunding the police or budget cuts or anything along those lines. But at the end of the day, There's a lot of negligence involved if somebody thinks they have a taser in their hand and it's really a firearm. And neither you or I would be spared any kind of issues in the sense of legal trouble if we just happen to say, well, I thought I had a taser, but it was really a gun. We wouldn't be spared that either. So keep that in mind, okay? So I'm just trying to go down the road of what occurred here and what's leading to this unrest and how that's going to eventually lead into worse situations, okay? So we learned from Dante Wright, which is a terrible situation, but it did happen. We learned from his situation to say, okay, if I can avoid these interactions, that's the best way to go. So things like driving a car that has, expired tags is a good way to open the door, and then it goes down the rabbit hole from there. As the police, it is definitely justifiable to be upset at the fact that somebody thought they had a taser in their hand. It was really a firearm. More training, more weapons proficiency, more practice, more of those things might be necessary. And you'd be surprised by how little practice some police departments actually require of their people in uniform that actually carry a gun for a living, and how much more practice the average gun owner or Second Amendment advocate actually has versus a lot of the police out there who carry a gun and get paid for it. So keep that in mind, okay? So this is going to lead to different situations. One of those situations is going to be an enhanced police state. Now, a lot of people are saying, defund the police, get rid of the police, okay? I think most of us agree that that's not a good answer. But a lot of people are also very gung-ho on overfunding the police and allowing them to become more and more militarized in order to protect themselves, which is understandable from a gut reaction standpoint to say, I don't want any of these people to be put in danger. However, that can also lead to very bad situations in the future. And so what happens is that due to the fact that gross negligence and lack of training was involved, and due to the fact that people are still dying at the hands of police when they shouldn't be dying, now we're going to find ourselves in a situation that's going to justify imperialistic police forces. And what that means is that they're going to take away the community from the police. They're going to take all deviations away from the police. Everything's going to be scripted. AI will be involved to take human error out of the equation, and eventually we'll see more and more situations involving police that are very inhuman. The interaction won't be there, the decision making won't be there. Everything will have a if A happens then B must occur situation, and that can be dangerous because we can see already in the state of Minnesota that they are barricaded. They have razor wire, they have barricades, they have all kinds of stuff put up in order to defend the courthouse and everything during the Derek Chauvin trial, and this unrest is going to continually justify that situation, and the police are going to become more and more armored, and fortresses are going to become more and more fortified in order to combat the unrest. So what happens is that we say, okay, and this is not me saying, I'm saying we in the sense of the powers that be, okay, now we're going to fix the problem for you, okay? We might even have to get police from outside who are willing to execute orders in the way that we see fit. And we can see this starting to occur even now, especially with all the different training programs that are out there. Police are going to become more and more robotic in many ways. And I'm not talking about that in the sense of cyborg. I'm talking about that in the sense of how they are going to make their decisions and what they're going to be able to do and how they're going to be capable of doing it. This is where things are going to head, and the justification is being put there on purpose by the media, which we know only reports on things a certain way in order to put more of this vitriol out there into the environment, okay? And at the same time, leadership. We know leadership is greatly at fault. Leadership when it comes to all the way from places like the White House, all the way down to the police precincts who are in charge of the people involved in these shootings. The leadership has failures at all points, but those failures are most likely on purpose because we're going to keep moving the ball towards having a totalitarian police state situation. Consider the fact that the police chief released the video to be as transparent as possible and then didn't really admit to any fault or anything along those lines, mostly just said that this was an accident. It was a discharge of a firearm that was supposed to be a taser due to what was heard in the audio as well as what was seen in the video. But making those excuses and talking about things in those manners is only going to escalate and pour gas on the fire, because that's not what people want to hear. People want to hear someone at least come out and say, this is effed up and we got to figure something out because this should not have happened. So in order to protect everybody at the top and in order to justify putting these new programs into place that are going to remove police from the community in the sense of being human with each other and put them on a different tier of basically untouchable shock troops of some kind, this is what is going to start happening. And now this is just my opinion, this is speculation on the future, of course, but we can see the pieces being put into place. Now, consider this idea, okay? I live in a smaller town, good town, right? One of my good friends here happens to be a black man. Definitely gets pulled over more often than I do. For any reason in particular? Not that I can tell. However, during his last interaction, there was some talk about why there was constant harassment, especially targeted towards him. Do you want to know what the answer was? The answer was to pull out a card that had a script on it, and that script then could only be read and no deviation was allowed past that point of conversation. Those lack of deviations are going to take the right of the police to make decisions in the future to let things slide, decisions in the future to address a situation the way they see fit, regardless of whether or not it's along the legal bounds of what's happening, okay? And keep that in mind, because there are many, many times where good people who are in the uniform and that are police officers look the other way to enhance somebody's possibility of being successful in their life, okay? And there's many times, I'm sure many of you can remember, where a police officer let you off without a ticket, maybe gave you a warning, maybe had a stern conversation with you, but you didn't end up in cuffs and you didn't end up going to jail because that police officer decided that his situation that he wanted to deal with in that moment didn't require possibly ruining somebody's future. And that will no longer be on the table when these things start to come into pass, okay? So I wanted to address this because, let's be honest, if you can avoid these interactions, there's a good chance you're gonna survive. And that applies to everyone, not just young black males that are in these urban environments, but everyone can do better by trying their best to stay under the radar. And at the same time, we can see that the police are being pushed into a certain direction out of the need to, which is being presented conveniently by the media and the leadership. So, as people who want to be prepared and people who are worried about the way things are moving towards, we need to see this with our eyes and say, okay, this is where we're going. This is not a good step for us to take, but it is happening. And Minnesota's ground zero, because everything there right now is a powder keg, and expect things to continually get worse, especially since everything's on a global stage now. And the best way to deal with people who don't want to enforce laws that could be considered unconstitutional is to bring people in who don't care about the Constitution. So, like I said, I'm not here to be judge, jury, or anybody. Not trying to be political, trying to address the situation with the facts that are presented as is, and to let you know that there's a good chance this whole situation's moving towards something you and I both know to be very dystopian. And that's not what we want, because that is going to make life much more difficult. So, if you have anything else to add about what happened here in the sense of the unrest that is occurring right now in Minnesota that will likely continue and probably isn't going anywhere, then leave it in the comments below. But besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.